So one of the scariest real-life nightmares to set on this planet of ours are those damn 8-legged freaks known as spiders. I hate spiders, and honestly speaking, I don't even know why I'm doing this video considering I'm pretty damn close to having arachnophobia myself. Speaking of which, this should be pretty obvious considering the title of today's video, but for those of you having arachnophobia, I highly suggest you skip out on this video as today we'll be talking about the creepiest 8-legged creatures in our favorite horror games. As always, to keep things interesting, we'll only be focusing on one entry per franchise, mainly because my favorite survival horror franchise of all time can easily fill up half of this list without that rule. Also, as the title suggests, I'm only looking at horror games for these entries. So here's a quick shout out to Skyrim, Hogwarts Legacy, and even Zelda Twilight Princess, since those creepy crawlers won't be appearing on today's list. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. Also, hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Anyway, my name is Ruben with Nerdspace Games, and this is the top 10 creepiest spiders in horror games. Let's get it. Number 10, Spiderwoman, Parasite Eve. The spiders in the sewer section of Parasite Eve are already a massive pain in the ass to deal with thanks to their webbing attack that slows Ayabrea down. However, the giant spider rooftop boss fight against Spiderwoman, a giant female spider, is without a doubt the creepiest fight of the game, especially if you're like me and you don't like spiders. However, the Spiderwoman isn't just creepy, but she's extremely annoying to deal with. That's mainly due to the battlefield and her abilities. See, the battlefield is actually one of the biggest in the game. And sure, that might sound like a blessing, but it's actually not. See, the Spiderwoman has some long-range attacks, like the fact that she can shoot fireballs that are hard to dodge unless you're using the haste ability. However, her most annoying attack is her webs. She can shoot webs at the ground, creating 3 surprisingly large spots on the rooftop that, if you step on it, forces Ayabrea to basically move so slow that she's basically a sitting duck for Spiderwoman's attack. It can be extremely annoying, especially if you are lacking any long-range weapons, and it's one of the more annoying fights of the game. Sure, she's not as creepy as most spiders on today's list, but her size and abilities at least earns her a spot at the bottom of today's list. Number 9, Sea Spiders, Soma. Even though these crawlers are the only entry on today's list that don't actually attack the player, the sea spiders of Soma are absolutely terrifying and do a phenomenal job at creating one of the most tense moments of the game. For anybody that's as terrified as I am of spiders, let me know if this scares the living hell out of you. Imagine you are deep underwater and you're investigating a sea cave. All of a sudden, you notice big ass spiders crawling all around you, literally taking up almost every inch of the cave that you are exploring. Sure, they don't attack you or anything, but Jesus, just being surrounded by these creepy ass spiders is pure nightmare fuel. Number 8, the Spider Fiend, Last Year After Dark. Unfortunately, this entry comes from a game that is no longer available due to the company that developed Last Year After Dark shutting down due to bankruptcy. Well, sort of, I'll get to that in just a moment. And while the game was far from perfect, mostly due to balancing issues and repetitive gameplay experiences that felt stale after a while, Last Year After Dark was another asymmetrical horror game that allowed players to play as either a killer or one of 5 survivors. And one of the more terrifying enemy types is the giant spider fiend. While playing as the spider itself can be fun and exciting, playing as the survivors that have to deal with this fast-moving venomous fiend is enough to stress out even the best of gamers out there. With long-range attacks, the spider's speed, the ability to web-sling across buildings or rooms, and even the ability to create a trapdoor for the spider to hide in before surprising the survivors, yeah, the Spider Fiend had no shortage of abilities and skills to keep the survivors on their toes. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, the game eventually died thanks to its rough start as a Discord Games exclusive and then failing to nail a publisher when it came to Steam. However, recently there's been an update as a new company took over the IP and it looks to be launching again under the new title of Forest Hills The Last Year. Here's to hoping it does better this time around, as Last Year is a criminally underrated asymmetrical horror game that just ran into a lot of bad luck when it was initially released. But god, that spider, man, can't say I'm excited to see that thing again. Number 7, Trites, Doom 3. Doom 3 went a completely different direction than both its predecessors and the sequels that came after it, as it moved away from action and went full-blown horror on us. Complete with scarier demonic creatures and a more tense atmospheric horror setting, Doom 3 is without a doubt the scariest game of the franchise. And one of those demonic creatures that contributes to the scare factor are the Trites. What's scarier than giant spiders, you might ask? How about demonic spiders that come in swarms in which they crawl out of the vents and appear from dark corners? Seriously, that sequence in which you're waiting for the elevator to show up and which you are swarmed by them had me checking my bed multiple times at night as I kept thinking spiders were crawling all over me. They might be relatively easy to take down compared to some of the bigger entries on today's list, but that doesn't mean that they're any less terrifying thanks to the amount of them that show up in the darker locations of Doom 3. Number 6, Giant Spider, the Mew House.
What the hell?
The most recent example of a giant spider in a horror game is in the indie survivor horror game called The Mew House. Leading up to the confrontation with this giant arachnid, you see small hints of its existence, whether it be through files or just random web all over the place. Unfortunately, as you would expect in a horror game, you'll eventually come face to face with it in a small room. Ironically, while the room is relatively small, this giant ass spider that lives in the room is not. Even the way it crawls down from the ceiling to confront the player is creepy as hell for anybody that hates spiders, and the sounds it makes as it slowly crawls towards you is extremely unnerving to say the least. That being said, gameplay wise, it's one of the easiest enemies to deal with because all you gotta do is keep firing at it, preferably with your shotgun, and you can keep it at a distance, therefore keeping it from dealing any damage to you. Number 5, Spider Glutton, Dead of Darkness. Don't let the pixel art style fool you. The Spider Glutton of Dead of Darkness is one of the most terrifying spiders seen in a horror game. While the game is definitely more challenging than you might think, the Spider Glutton is both one of the more creepy designs and challenging enemies in this game. From a design point of view, it looks like some sort of alien spider. But from a gameplay side of things, it becomes one of the more challenging enemies in the game thanks to its ability to literally eat the player in a single bite. Yep, that's insta-kill for you. I guess that's where the name Spider Glutton comes from, right? Number 4, Giant Nightmare Apostle, Bloodborne. So there's actually 2 different spider enemies that are deserving of a spot on today's list. Probably the most popular and recognizable one is Rom, which is a boss fight in which it summons additional spiders to attack you during the fight. And while this fight in its own right is absolutely terrifying, something about fighting the giant Nightmare Apostles in dark and small rooms, it's just much more terrifying. Unlike the ROM where you'll fight it in one of the brightest areas of the game, Giant Nightmare Apostles are mini bosses that you'll have to fight in some of the gloomiest and darkest areas of the game. Also, they have a much more terrifying entrance as they tend to just hang from the ceiling before slowly crawling down onto the floor to attack the player. Sure, ROM can summon a bunch of spiders similar to the Giant Nightmare Apostle, but something about the aesthetics of this spider and where you normally find them is much more terrifying and unsettling than anything ROM can throw at you. Number 3, Black Tiger, Resident Evil. Speaking of giant spiders that know how to make a grand entrance, the Black Tiger does that as well in both the original and the remake of Resident Evil. Starting on the ceiling as it slowly makes its way down to the floor to confront Chris or Jill, the Black Tiger is one of the biggest spiders in the Resident Evil franchise. Well, behind the Black Widow and Code Veronica, that is. Anyway, what really makes this spider a little more terrifying is that 1, it feels like you're trapped in the room with it since the door in front of you is covered in webs, and 2, the visuals on the spider alone, all the way down to the hair all across its body, are both enough reasons to make your skin crawl. In fact, even the battle arena in which you find yourself inside of a cave covered in webs also adds to the terrifying experience you find yourself in against the Black Tiger. Oh, and did I mention that this spider has a giant tarantula with it, shoots acid at you, can bolt towards you in a moment's notice, and even when it dies, it sends a bunch of its babies after you. Yeah, not a good time at all if you're afraid of spiders, that's for sure. Number 2, The Spider Hunt Showdown. To be honest with you guys, I heavily debated if I should feature this spider on today's list due to it being from a game that's more of an adjacent horror game rather than a true horror game. However, considering how terrifying this spider is, combined with the fact that Hunt Showdown is technically labeled as a survival horror game to some extent, yeah, I decided that I had to include it on today's list. Not only is this spider terrifying, but it's arguably one of the scariest spiders seen in a horror game. Hell, it's even the most dangerous spider seen in a horror game, as this one is one fast critter. Seriously, after making a few attempts to attack the players, this spider can bolt across the room before you even have a chance to react to it showing up. From being able to pounce on the hunters, to shooting a cloud of acid, to poison the players, this spider is definitely one to be reckoned with. And it's absolutely terrifying watching it stalk you from one of the dark corners in the room and seeing it quickly make its way over to you or one of your allies. Yeah, even if you're not even afraid of spiders, this thing's terrifying. Anyways, before we take a look at the scariest web-crawling arachnid, here's a quick look at a few honorable mentions. Number 1, Silhouette Spider, Limbo. Just like Little Nightmares, Bramble the Mountain King, and other platformer horror games, Limbo is the type of game that you might not realize is a horror game until you dive into it and start to unravel the dark themes behind its story. One of the more terrifying moments in the game is when the boy, the main protagonist of the game, comes across a silhouette of a giant spider. While it's a simplistic design, the way the silhouette of the spider moves towards the player and stalks him throughout certain sections of the game is extremely eerie and unsettling to experience. The moment that really gets to me is when the spider grabs the boy and wraps him up in its webs. Yeah, watching this entire sequence reminds me exactly why spiders are so terrifying, and I imagine anybody suffering from arachnophobia would agree that this spider, despite its simplistic design, is the creepiest 8-legged freak in a horror game. But that does it for this episode of Nerd Space Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is the silhouette spider of Limbo the creepiest spider in a horror game, or is there a different spider that deserves that title? Let me know down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror content. Also, leave a like in today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.